engagement there.
You're listening to Head South Radio with your host, Kat Meyer, a podcast dedicated to prioritizing pleasure and removing the stigma and shame around sex. We're here to be curious and have an open conversation about sexual health and relational wellness. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. The information discussed is not a substitute for professional medical advice.
Hey there, I'm your host, Kat Meyer. This is our last episode for Season 1, and I wanted to say a heartfelt thank you to everyone who has been tuning in and listening every week since we launched. This is our 20th episode, and it's all been made possible because of my team, our producer, Isis Barlow, our designer, Ella Chodos Irvine, and our editor, Megan Hauk. I wanted to thank Lily Rezi Rothman, Murph Meyer, and Gina Chiapacasa for their contributions. A very special thank you to all of our guests who have been so generous with their knowledge and open and vulnerable to sharing their own personal experiences. In our Season 1 finale, we have Kyle Freeman. Kyle is an artist, a spiritual and energetic creative based in Lisbon and New York City. She has over 15 years of experience refining her intuitive skills and developing an in-depth understanding of both the built environment and the individual's physical, psychological, and spiritual relationship to their body and their environment. She guides her clients in weaving spirit and persona together to create worlds from the vibrancy of their full being. We talk about a few topics on this episode, but I think one of the biggest takeaways for me was the discussion Kyle and I had about dismantling a home when you were moving out of a space you once shared with a partner. That's currently what I am going through, and it felt cathartic and validating to express how I was feeling and the approach I've been taking, as well as hear Kyle's advice on the subject. We also dive into the conversation around casual sex, the energetics of intimacy, and a listener question regarding moving into your partner's apartment and how to blend a space already occupied. I also asked Kyle for her advice on removing stale, negative, or old energy from objects or spaces, or clearing out old energy from ex-partners and roommates. Please take a moment to leave a review and a rating wherever you listen to podcasts to help us grow. We appreciate your support, and if this episode resonates with you, or you know someone who may want to listen, please share it with them and on your social media channels. I hope you enjoy this episode and have a safe and happy summer. Find a comfortable seat. And shift your weight side to side, forward and back. And starting to settle into the weight of your body. Growing tall through the crown of your head. And then from that suspension, can your elbows be a little bit heavier so that the shoulder blades can draw down the back like a cape? And then take a moment to notice your breath. And just setting a quick little intention for yourself for this conversation. And then Kyle, when you're ready, you can start to blink your eyes open, taking in the light, taking in your screen. Hi.
Hi.
Good morning.
I love the cape visual.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites to kind of draw the shoulders down the back and just feel everything on your back body kind of just decompressing in a way and kind of just draping down your back rather than like forcing your shoulder blades down. It's just kind of a nice settling and grounding. To get started, can you give us a little background on Kyle Freeman?
Woo, that's a big question.
Uh-huh.
Can you give me any sort of cue in that?
Absolutely. For me, what's your sign?
Oh, I love that. Okay. In Western astrology, I am Taurus sun, Pisces moon, Cancer rising.
Ooh, I have goosebumps. Sorry. That's a very good trio. And I can sense that from you. Totally.
Yeah, I do feel like I embody it for sure.
Yeah. You are very grounded, but very like emotionally intelligent. And like, that's definitely your Pisces and Cancer, but I can sense in the short time I've met you, in our brief conversation before, I can feel all of that from you.
Yeah.
Of like the very grounded, earthy, solid foundational being, but then also having the ability to kind of expand beyond that with emotionality, and it's very cool.
Definitely the watery aspects. I feel like I swim through life.
Yeah. Flowing river.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you grow up? And where do you live now?
Okay, so I grew up along the Gulf Coast in the US. And when I was around 19, I moved to New York. And then a few years ago, I moved my home base to Portugal.
And then what do you do for work, or how do you express yourself out in the world?
I express my work in many different avenues, but my formal education was in architecture. And I feel like that informs a lot of the way in which I see and experience things, like especially the education of architecture. And I found pretty early on that was I kind of had natural this is pointing to the Cancer and the Pisces. I had natural skills of seeing the invisible energy in these forms. And so I was like, "Oh, okay." So built architecture wasn't quite the right avenue for me. And I met an acupuncturist shaman when I was pretty young, right when I had moved to New York. And he was like, "Oh, you're like me." And I was like, "No, no, no. I'm a professional." Like I had already kind of, in that moment, I had dropped out of school and I was working in an architecture firm. And I was like, very on this like linear trajectory to be an architect. And he kind of shrugged his shoulders and he was like, "Okay." You know, like, sure, whatever. And then over time, during sessions with him, I was like, "Oh shit. I'm like you. Like, what do I do now?" And at that time, I thought I invested so much in this like architectural world or whatever. And so I branched out to intuitively educate myself on like how bodies moved in space. And so, like, the energetics of our relationship to space. And that has led me in many, many directions. And right now, mostly I do intuitive guidance sessions. So that can focus on many different things. Sometimes we're weaving in like your relationship to home, so building intimacy with your like built environment. Sometimes that can be working on like your connection just to the external world in general, and how you are organizing that and building that, and the points of connection that you're making in the external world. And also that can be working with your own energy field, right? And I studied feng shui formally for a really long time, and it's like your home mirrors your internal landscape. So the home is a great like laboratory to start to see what's going on internally, and then manipulate it like in the external, and then receive from that creativity.
That's amazing. I love your journey and path because it isn't linear for a lot of us.
There's a myth that it is, right?
Right. But then to feel that guilt of like, oh, I've invested in this education and I should be following this path because it's structured this systemically this way. There's a system here. And when you're like, oh no, I'm kind of moving expansively and exploring and like that's what I'm drawn to and like listening to intuition versus like here's the route we take. And I think for a lot of us, I relate completely to your story and your experience and kind of going through I had a period of like guilt of like, oh, what this mold, this vision of what my life should be
Yes.
isn't feeling right. But I don't regret investing in those forms of education because they have set the foundation for me to be able to expand out and like work with my own intuition, work with energy. Because to work with energy isn't necessarily to get a like certification in energy.
Like, does the opposite. It does not help you at all.
Right. But the foundations of architecture you can use to relate and communicate within space and energy and time and know that field. And I love that it's perception. So what we are building around us is what's happening internally or vice versa, and they influence one another. And so I love that your work is kind of bridging that because a lot of us don't know the internal landscape so well and don't realize that our external landscape, our homes and our spaces that we put our bodies in are experiencing so much energetic flow and require us to kind of tune in and go in and see what's going on in there. But if your external world is kind of chaotic or doesn't feel right to you or you don't feel right in it, it's hard to then tune into what's going on.
That's true. And then the power that you get from starting to build confidence that you can shift things internally. And while you may not see them immediately externally, there is a direct correlation. And that's the other cool thing is having followed an intuitive educational journey is that I didn't realize I was also honing my intuition and building that deep sense of trust with that voice within. And that's also a lot of what I work with people is to really hone in on that like higher self voice while also having it communicate with our humanness.
Mm-hmm.
I was just looking back at a journal recently, like a journal entry that was really old, and it was me really grappling with like my humanness really wanted one thing, and then but I was like, but then this other aspect of me wants this whole other thing, and it was painfully challenging to start to weave those together. And that's kind of the magic of existing on this planet.
Yeah, how to merge the things that maybe seem so far like polar opposites or so unattainable together, and like working on yourself to kind of create that world for yourself, like pulling it all together. But it takes
Yeah,
time.
it's alignment, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the cool thing of, I mean, Chinese medicine talks about this a lot, but like our pacing and like walking on this planet, like our human body is weaving that earthly and spirit together. So we're holding that magic and we're kind of we are a conduit.
So one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you, and I have a few, I have like bullet points. You're like one of the first guests I've had that I haven't prepared full questions, and more of like, this is based off of our first conversation. I was like, oh, this is very much a conversation. And so one of the subject matter I'd like to touch on is cohabitation, because we kind of briefly touched on that of like building a home together, but then also the process of dismantling a home when you break up. So the relational wellness, well-being of building a home. And have you worked with couples? Have you worked with people who were going through breakups? I myself am currently moving, and it's a home that I had shared with a partner who had moved out last year. And that process has been very eye-opening because it's painful. It's like reopening wounds for me of like moving stuff or like looking at things that like, oh, we bought this together or this is actually theirs. And he had to come back last week and pick up some things that were still in the apartment that I didn't realize were his, or that I was like, oh, this is energetically like feeling like grief in a way that I don't want to hold on to this. And so he came back and got some of his books or pictures for that reason. Like I recognized that I wasn't holding on to them for joy. I was holding on to them out of like fear, grief, sadness. And so it's been a big process. It's something I don't think a lot of people think about or talk about, is like when you build a home together and then there's a breakup and maybe one of the partners stays in the home in the same space. And like I redecorated, I moved some stuff around, I changed it up energetically. But then to go through the process of moving, which you're like, moving is hard. It's like one of the top 5 stressful things people go through in life. But then to move when it's attached to a breakup or grief or sadness. So that's a lot. That I just wanted to share my experience with it right now with cohabitation or dismantling cohabitation. And I just wanted to get your take on like what you do with people when you're working with them, or your own personal experiences with cohabitating with a partner, as well as the dismantling of a home.
Let's talk about the dismantling first, especially since you're in the experience. But I wish that more people would hire me to dismantle, right? It's kind of like you're saying, it's like that shadow space that everyone is just like, oh, let's just throw it in a truck or throw it in a garbage bin manically and be done
Yeah.
with it.
So I've been packing up this apartment. I knew I was going to be moving maybe a month ago, 2 months ago. It's been a 2 month process now, and like slowly going through everything, because I knew like I have in past moves done that same thing of like moves based off of breakups, moves because it's just a big shift, and being like, and just throwing stuff into storage, and then a year later opening up and being like, what is this? Like, get rid of it. Like that kind of panic mode. And so I kind of intentionally wanted to go through like Marie Kondo it and like touch everything, experience everything. So I've been doing this move for months now, this process. But yeah, I've had to call many friends and my current partner in like moments of full panic, like a puddle on the floor moments, because it's just like it hits you. Like it hits you like such a hard wave that you weren't expecting. And it's like, this is an old ashtray. Like I don't this is just like some random stupid thing. And I like am a mess. You know, it's happened many times over the course of the 2 months now that this has been going on for me. And I'm like processing it.
Well, I mean, so I'd say you have to do that processing at some point, anyways. And if you're doing it very consciously, like you're doing, your home is actually, and all of these objects are actually supporting you because you can see you have that external mirror. And so, what you're doing each time you pick up an object, like, I mean, I always really, really warn people, like, drink a lot of water, get a lot of sleep. Like, what you're doing is crazy energetic work. And so each time you're picking up an object, and when you're doing it really consciously with presence, and you're deciding, like, does this go or does this stay, or what is this connection, you're feeling inside. You're doing energy work on your body as well. And it's also really cool that you reached out for support from your friends, because you don't need to be in like a dark closet doing it all alone, like any sort of processing or energy work. And then calling in your partner. I mean, not everyone still has a healthy enough connection that they can do that. And I really suggest, if you don't have that, to create some sort of ritual where you sit and energetically call on the partner and be like, hey, actually, can you take this back? Like, in your mind, or you can speak out loud to the walls. Like, I am going to release this. Sometimes, if I feel like the person can't hold it right now, and if you intuitively feel like your ex cannot hold it, then I give it up to that person's like spirit support or their higher self to hold, so that I'm not holding anymore. Like, this is not mine. So I'm going to give this up. And then when that person is ready to process it, it's over in their world. The fact that you were able to actually call the person back in and have that exchange is even amazing. But not to say that that is the only way. But so I think the biggest thing when you were very slowly unraveling is to recognize how much work you're doing in your body. And so it's like, do you need some acupuncture also? Like, do you need, like I was saying, extra rest? Definitely water. Water is one of the biggest things. And just know that this investment in this moment, like, you don't have to do it all. You could throw it in a storage closet and do it later, but you're stuffing it to the side to do later. So this investment in this process is an investment in yourself and in moving forward in your next stage of life, and clearing out now what you are like ready to clear out. And then I never really recommend, I feel like a storage closet is kind of that like blind spot in your mind, and I don't recommend it. But if it has to happen, like, be kind to yourself. Like, okay, this is going to get pushed away for a little while, and kind of make a notation of like, I'm going to check back in 6 months. And if I still can't deal with it, I'm going to check back in 6 more months. But what I don't recommend is having someone else do it for you entirely.
Because then you're not actually processing, you're not doing the work.
You're not, and you don't even have to think of it as like, I almost feel like sometimes when I say you're not doing the work, people can feel a sense of shame. And it's like that tangible picking up the object, like, I know you've just been through it. It's so helpful because you actually, it's a trigger. The energy and the motion comes up to be released or to be digested, or whatever you're, however you're sorting through it. And then if you just throw it all in a bin, it's going to be harder later on to actually feel the different emotions. And so I think it's a really kind thing to do the work in real time, is a really kind thing to do for yourself.
You use the word unraveling, and I think that's part of the fear of doing that work or going through that process is like the fear of like, oh, I'm going to completely unravel, and to be okay with like being a puddle, like allowing those waves of emotions to hit you that you don't want to address, you don't want to experience, but allowing yourself to be hit with those waves, but then also having lifeguards, like support systems and things that you know, like, oh, here's my buoy. This is like, I'm going to go get a massage after I do this series in this room, going through these things, and really take care of oneself through that process to set yourself up to get through it versus like, I'm just going to dive in headfirst, even though that sign says shallow, and like, hope for the best. But it's like, no, if you have lifeguards, if you have people in your life who, like my mom is one of them, my dear friend Bonnie, you know, my partner, current partner now, and my ex, like we're all very understanding of like what I'm going through. And I explained this to all of them. And so they know, like they, you know, they got calls early in the morning and late in the evening when I was trying to do this in between working and sleeping. Very, very supportive and understanding. And so, yeah, it's absolutely vital in these processes of dismantling and unraveling so that you don't fully unravel and that the fear is like, I'm not going to get through this, is to have the support.
Yeah, I love the term lifeguards.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's also be really honest, like I'm a deep swimmer. Like I can be underwater for extended period of time, literally and metaphorically. And if you're not a deep swimmer, you know, do it in really small bits. I often tell people set a timer. 45 minutes work and then have something go outside right afterwards or have something to change the scenery, lifeguard support, something to bring you back up to surface.
Yeah. With people who can't, I too can, I trained as a child like swimming. I was a competitive swimmer, and so distance swimming, no breathing was a big part of it, and like breath work was a big part of my childhood. And also just being a cancer, I can sit for long periods of time in emotions. But when you don't have that, when you don't have those traits, when we talk about lifeguards, I think even just to your point of like, don't have someone else do it for you, but maybe you might have to invite a best friend, a family member, someone to come over and help you go through that process. Sometimes that part of the process that you can like, who also validates the fact that you might be unsure, like it's okay, like let's put it in the maybe pile for now, like helps you kind of move through that process and validate your experience. Even like your resistance to the experience is very helpful for people who might be uncomfortable being alone in that, like just going through that process. Like I could do it alone, but I had moments where I had to like call the landline. But for others, if you understand and know that like, hey, I can't go this deep, sometimes you might have to ask your lifeguards to come with you and do that like short incremental, then going for a walk, getting an ice cream, doing things outside to breathe and to process in a different way, I think, and digest it.
Yeah, and you bring up breath work and energy work. I also teach breath work and energy work in the sense of, well, all senses, but one big aspect of that is being, I know we talked about this before, being emotionally available to yourself and increasing your capacity to be emotionally available to yourself. So I'm not saying you need to go do breathwork classes to break up with your partner, but you might want to pick up a few breathwork classes just to, in that time or forever, but have a regular connection with your breath, because that helps you, as you know, move the energy through you, experience it and then move it out. You know, it's not these, you're unraveling and you're going through your belongings and stuff, but it's not for you to stay there forever. It's not for you to stay in that, the permanent state of that memory or that energy.
So I wanted to shift gears a little bit. I lied. I didn't prepare questions, but I did have someone send an anonymous question because they knew I was going to be speaking to you. And so this person is moving in with a partner. It's their first time moving in with their partner. And originally, the two of them were looking for a home together separately. And right now, I don't know if you're aware, but New York real estate and finding apartments to rent is kind of impossible at this point. It's kind of crazy. So this person wrote and asked, what is your advice? Because now they have decided her partner's ex roommate is moving out. The former roommate is moving out. And towards the end of the roommate situation, there was a lot of turbulence and very uncomfortable energy in the space. And then with the person asking the question, they're moving in with their partner. They want to clear the energy in a way of like that old energy with the roommate situation, but also wanting to understand how they can set up the space so that it feels like a weaving together of these two people. And so, especially I think for a lot of people, sometimes it happens where you move into a partner space and then it doesn't feel like your own, or you kind of feel like, oh, this is your apartment. I'm just living here. But also, this person has, the awareness of like, oh, but prior to me being here, there was also this like tension energy. So, kind of, how do you approach the tension energy, and how would you approach melding and kind of cohabitating in a space that wasn't yours originally?
Okay, so great, because this kind of weaves in like how your other question of how do you build a home with a partner. And the first like idea that I want to introduce is that everyone always thinks like home building with your partner is a series of compromises. And while I guess sometimes a compromise is kind of the easier route, the way I see it is like you're building a relationship. You're building a third world. So it's that like sex and birth of something new, something bigger than the two of you. So as you're making the decisions together, think of it less as like, oh, I'm going to sacrifice part of myself to be with this person, and have dialogues where you are coming to a more interesting decision, like something that is a collaboration. It's not like, oh, I'm going to default to this person for this, I'm going to default to this person for this. So when I'm working with two different people and they have different needs or viewpoints, I try and look at like the in between space of where something new can be born. And I try and do that as much as possible as you're making the decisions around building. The second thing is build slowly. I mean, think of it as building a relationship. Maybe write down like a hierarchy of like, okay, well, we definitely need these objects to live with, but don't try and complete the whole home within a month. Like, it's not a race, it's a creative third world building process. So, as far as clearing the energy, I think it takes dropping into a real level of sensitivity. And I would suggest doing this many rounds, but going through. So, has the roommate moved out in the process? Okay. So, once the roommate moves out, go through the home. And this is kind of applies to breakups as well. Go through the home and look and even touch like every object and recall the like turbulent energy and see where it's still stuck. If a memory, like if you glance at something and it recalls that sense of that energy, then it needs to go. Or you can wrap it in your love. So you'll create a ritual for yourself that is working with that object to clear it and create your own relationship to it that's different than the relationship was previously there. And you have to be honest with yourself. Like if you try it and it just doesn't work, then it's not working and you're not able to clear it, and that's okay. Now, the new partner that is coming in, I find it's really it's hard to say like general rules of what you should do, but the clearing has to happen. The clearing of the roommate has to happen first. And then you can also use basic space clearing techniques of sound, whether it's like artificial sound or whether you're going through with, I love like bells, any sort of rattles, noise, like vibrations will break up stagnancy, disperse that. And you can use, my favorite thing is to use resins on top of charcoal discs. So you can clear and then you can start to fill it with sounds that you really love on a regular basis, or like diffuse oils or smells that you really love. So do a real clearing process and then ask the partner how they feel when they're coming in. Like, does it feel different? And start to look at, I would want to talk to the person who was living there and see what connections they have with the home already. Because a lot of people have like, I'll be able to pick up on certain connections that they have the home that would block the intimacy with the other person. And so I think that's a little bit hard to do on your own, but maybe the partner could see it as well. Or the partner can just be honest about like, just this doesn't resonate with you. I feel like it's really like only your world, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But is it only your world and I have a connection to you like, oh, that's them over there? As opposed to like, oh, actually, that's really triggering for me for whatever reason. And then you have to start to work with that.
Yeah, I appreciate that of introspection of like looking at what you feel around this experience because sometimes it is like, oh, this is their space and like feeling good about like appreciating that and like I'm integrating myself in over time versus like, oh, I feel very left out. I don't feel at home. I feel displaced in that kind of energy and where that's coming from, that kind of thinking or feeling.
Yeah, and it's similar to a relationship. Like you never, I mean, it is a relationship, but it's similar to you building your relationship in that you never want to shut down the other person in the way they naturally act, but you can share how you feel in that shared space with a person. Like, oh, when you do this, I feel this way. And the person doesn't have to feel shame. They don't have to change. But even just having the awareness of everyone having the awareness of, I feel like I shoot out of my body when I'm in this corner of your home. And is there some other choice that we could make? Or could I cultivate, if you explain to me what's happening over in this corner of the home, could I cultivate a new perspective and a new relationship to it? But it's important that the person moving in feels like they can stay in their body and be at home in their body in the space. And sometimes it's really cool because that person coming in can point out a blind spot of their partner already living there and be like, I don't really know what this corner is. And that person might be like, I actually don't either. I think it's kind of been my hidden area that I just don't look at and have like put out of my mind. It's my blind spot that I don't want to examine. And then the partner can, like in a good relationship, bring light and illumination to it.
It's like I pictured the two fish in a fishbowl and like adding, or like a fish in a fishbowl and adding the fish, and they're like, the water is perfect. And they're like, water? What's going on? Because yeah, when you're living in it, and then you're like, yeah, actually that's always bothered me. And I didn't know what it was. And you kind of just then move through life. But then to have this new set of eyes, this new experience coming in to kind of help can be so beneficial for the partner that's already been living there. And then I wanted to add one thing about the exercise that you mentioned of like the process of the previous energy being there and kind of going through your stuff and like identifying like what energetically might feel sticky or stuck. And something I use both within my body to find stuck energy or foreign energy, as I like to call it, like being other people's energy that I've taken on and absorbed like a sponge. And also in my space is like just literally visualizing like slime or something, and then touching the things and being like, oh, that's what that feels like identifying a texture, a visual that like sluggishness, heaviness in my body where it feels that way or in the space. And then also when you said like wrapping it with love, it's like, oh, then I kind of use like a visual of like sparkles or like rainbow. So then visualizing like, oh, I'm going to how you would like you maybe might find like an old chair and there's energy on there and then you can feel it, it's sluggish, like nobody would even care about this chair, but then you see it and then you kind of refurbish it. So you kind of what you're doing is a process of like in that space where there might be stale, stagnant energy, sluggish energy, kind of refurbishing that with sparkles and your energy, your love, your light. But for me, that was a helpful visualization because sometimes people are like, energy, like, I don't know what this energy is. But if you can kind of even hold it and like, oh, this belonged to the old roommate, or this was something that we both shared, an ex, even like that, those two processes are the same of like visualizing it and being like, what does this mean to me? How does this feel? And like, can I refurbish it or should I remove it?
Yeah, you're describing so beautifully like the process of upping the points of connection of love in your home, which really changes the vibrancy of the home. And I have another metaphor for you. I've been using, because I live by the sea now, I've been using, not that there aren't oysters in New York, there definitely are, but I've been using the metaphor of the oyster and pearls as far as working with the foreign energy that's an irritant. So with the oyster, it's like the irritant comes in to the shell, and it's not really about getting rid of the irritant. The soft body of the oyster makes a substance called nacre. And so when the irritant comes in order to protect the soft body, it starts to wrap layer by layer. The soft body of the oyster creates the nacre and wraps it over and over and over. It's like a ritual of sorts of wrapping the irritant in this substance that is iridescent and eventually becomes this glowing pearl. So I always think of that, like if you can connect with your heart and like you were saying, the sparkles, and wrap it over and over and over in that glow, then you don't have to get rid of the irritant. You actually transmute it with your own sense of, not sense, you're with your own love.
And again, that's your like the math that we use, 1 + 1 makes 3. So your energy plus this object creates a third new object. It's not the same old object with like a paint job. It's a completely new thing in your life.
Exactly. Right. You're not just throwing a layer of paint over it, which might visually change it, but energetically, it will still evoke the same emotion or the same energetic pattern that it was before. Although paint can change your perspective, but and then that in and of itself, every time you look at it, you place a new energy on it.
Yeah. Paint color can completely change. And that is like part of the process of like what you said, like little incremental, like, oh yeah, like I
That
have a
is a
new,
layer of nacre. Yeah.
yes, exactly. It might just not be as like quick of a process. So that then can shift into the next part of the conversation that I wanted to hone on, which was you mentioned the energetics of intimacy. And you made reference to the fact that you were kind of working through the fact that society has encouraged us to dismiss our emotions when it comes to casual sex or less formal relationships, to like be more dismissive of our experience and our emotions around that. And so I would love for you to talk about the energetics of intimacy and what that means for you when it comes to talking about kind of withholding emotions that we probably shouldn't be, or feeling like we're hiding something, or not allowing ourselves to fully express or experience emotions when we're engaging in moments of intimacy or encountering sex with partners who aren't necessarily people who are in our lives otherwise.
Yeah, like what we I always call it like the myth of casual sex. I'm like, it actually takes, if you really want sex to be casual, it takes a lot of intention and actually a lot of emotional intelligence to create what I think what people are wanting with casual sex is a lack of commitment, a grand sense of freedom. And I feel, I was just reading the Gene Key on, I don't know if it was actually on commitment, but it was talking about commitment. And it was talking about how if you put 2 feet in and actually commit, even if it's just for the hour that you're fucking the person, then you really get the fullness of the experience. And you're also, it's weird to use the word protected, but you have, all of you is on the same page, or it's less likely you'll have like parts of you sneaking up to sabotage, and you'll actually get what you wanted out of it. You'll get the fullness of the experience that you were bargaining for. And I feel, I mean, this is what I see. You can tell me what you think. But there's a lot of shame around being able to express or even having emotions in casual sex. Like I remember going through a time period where I just actually started telling people that I wasn't partnering with, like I wasn't trying to create a relationship with, but I remember feeling like I needed to like warn people like, hey, I actually have feelings, like, and I'm going to have feelings in this engagement. If that doesn't feel okay for you, then we probably shouldn't do this because I am going to show up with that. And that was a cool filter system that helped me avoid tricky situations, which was like, I have emotions and I feel like because I embody my emotions and I really experience them, even if I don't state them, people can sense them. Like it's almost like they radiate out of me because I'm actually experiencing them. And so it would be hard, it would trigger people who really didn't want to experience any emotions around me. And we've talked about this before. It's like the fact that I'm so willing to experience my emotions, if I am physically intimate, which is so intimate, by the way, energetically so intimate, you are exchanging energy, then that other person, if they are really closed off to their emotions and they have a lot of shame wrapped around, like packaged around their emotions, then it is going to ignite, like me experiencing mine is going to unconsciously ignite them experiencing theirs. That shame is going to bubble up. And then, I mean, this sounds so dramatic, but I've gotten kind of emotionally attacked by that scenario where the person is mad that I've made them feel the shame that's theirs. And I'm like, well, I really wasn't, that wasn't my intention. Like I wanted to show up 2 feet in because I thought about this experience and I agreed to it. Like I am consciously having this experience. And I realized that can be kind of, I had to start that filtering process. Now I can read it a bit better without having to necessarily have that disclaimer. But that filter process helped me not get myself into situations where I was going to trigger someone's emotions that they weren't yet ready to experience. And it protected me from like a large wave of shame that would get dumped on me. And when I'm opening to like physical intimacy, I'm opening to that wave of shame in a way that I would not be doing if I was walking down the street.
My take on that is it's interesting that if we remove the status of casual, platonic, romantic, sexual, whatever those labels are for the dynamic of two people, I'm hearing you and realizing like, isn't it wonderful that you are working through in a space of creating the relationship, so in this case casual sex, but showing up your full human self with everything. And so what you're looking for is someone else who is able and willing to meet you or allow you, whether they're ready or not, but allow you that space to just be your full human self, Kyle, as you are right now, where you're at. And that's someone who is experiencing emotions, who is experiencing their body in a different way with this interaction with this person, and not with their shame, like projecting onto you that you should withdraw, that you should be smaller so that I can feel comfortable. Like that's a good filter to have, because it's not whether or not, hey, I want you to be my life partner. I want to get married right now. I want to, have babies, whatever it is in those interactions. Those are things that you communicate with the person. But like you being able to show up to a friend for coffee and you being able to show up to a family member's house, you being able to show up for a casual sex interaction, or you showing up with a long-term partner, in all of those scenarios, you want to be able to be your fullest self and express yourself wholly as much as you feel comfortable. Like, and I think that's what society does, is then we like kind of, oh, I have to play it cool. I have to do this, or I can't do that. There's like all these rules around casual sex. And then also in the escalator of relationships, like, oh, we have to do this by this point, or we have to be this way, or I need you to tell me this because people are wondering, what are we? But are you actually wondering? Are you comfortable with where you're at? Like, there's all of this societal pressure on the dynamics of certain relationships versus others. Like, no one's asking you, like, when are you and Susie going to be best friends? You guys have been known each other for a long time. So it's looking at like, oh, with certain very vulnerable spaces, especially when it comes to sex, and shame is completely wrapped around that, and we have to unravel that, to not allow yourself to be fully human and experience emotions. And for some of us, we experience a lot more emotions than others in these types of interactions, intimate experiences. But I think that we need to kind of stop playing it cool, if you want to experience your emotions and have connection in that way during sex, it's about the communication. Like the status of this relationship dynamic of being casual and not being more of a progressing partnership is still the same. It's just in that hour, 15 minutes, 5 minutes of interaction with this person. And the depth of a relationship isn't determined by time. That's something else I've kind of recognized. And like people associate success or lots of things around time and the time of a relationship. But you can literally have a one night stand and that can change your life. It can change how you experience sex moving forward. And it's important to remember that. And you can experience so many emotions around this person and then never see them again. And that's just as beautiful as people who've spent like their entire lives together that people would describe as soulmates. They met in high school, they're high school sweethearts, and now they're like 95. The power of those relationships is determined by the two people or even just the person themselves and like how they interpret that experience.
This is why I'm a huge fan of learning to be comfortable showing up fully. And that doesn't mean being emotionally available to yourself doesn't mean putting those emotions on someone else. And you do need to discern the difference, right? Because that's not nice to do. And it's not a nice experience for the other person. And you're going to get met with some resistance probably. Circling back to the idea of commitment, it's like someone recently was talking about asking me questions about like my relationships or something, and I was referring to a really successful relationship that I had, and he's like, well, it must have been not that successful because it ended. And I was like, fuck you. Like, it was very successful. I fully stepped in. I learned all that I needed to learn, and it was time to move on. And it's still something that I look back as one of the most beautiful experiences. And it's the same, like you're describing, when you put 2 feet in, circling back to the commitment, it's likely that you've been intuitively guided to have this one night stand with this person. We'll just use that as an example, to have this experience. And when you fully step into the experience, it will be successful. Even if it's a bad, quote unquote, bad experience, actually, you will clear something you've been trying to work on. You know, I've seen myself being like, "Ooh," like intuitively, I'm like, I want to do this, but I also, there's a part of me that's like, oh, this is going to be tricky. And then I do it and then it's terrible. And then, but it's like, I did it so consciously and I fully stepped both feet in and I watched everything that was happening and I enjoyed what I could enjoy. And I also was able to release something that I had been working on. And I felt very thankful that that partner showed up with me in that. And it was, all in all, maybe it wasn't great, but it's like now I can move on and it gave me information for what I need next, for example.
Yeah, I think people need to remove the idea of success in anything as time and like over time, over the course of time and like staying. Cause I'm like, my most successful education experience was second grade. I'm still not in second grade. You know what I mean? But that I know I was like, that was solid. Like I had a teacher that validated me. I like knew, I know I can look back in to second grade and be like, that is when I grew. There was so much of like my identity that formed in that year. But yeah, and it was a powerful time, but it ended because things have to end. And sometimes some things end or are shorter than others. You know, I'm sure you have had jobs that were incredible or moments, trips, vacations, all of these things, you know, they don't last forever, including relationships. And so people measuring success in relationships or defining success of a relationship based on the length of time or the fact that something ended, it's like, no,
It's crazy.
actually,
Yeah. If you
yeah.
get the memo to get out and you get out at the right time, it's incredible because you got what you needed. You didn't stew in it for too long. And it's a really flow feeling. I also wanted to bring up more and more lately. I've been supporting people in learning to describe and create language for these liminal spaces, which are like not labels, like you were saying. Like maybe we could just throw out the labels and maybe, just maybe, we could show up to each other and we could describe where we are. Like we could check in on a regular basis. And these liminal spaces of like, well, I don't feel, and be really honest, like I don't feel like I'm ready for a commitment on a certain level, but like I'm very enthusiastic about this, like this is really lighting me up, or use more descriptive wording as opposed to labeling to describe what your current experience is so you can see if you are on the same, or the other partner, the two of you can see if you're on the same page or not, and giving each other a lot of space to maybe not quite be on the same page, but still feel like, okay, well, we're not on the same page, but this is still feeling good. Like, I'm okay. I'm okay with you not feeling the exact way that I do, but now that I can have a sense of what you're feeling, I'm really still comfortable in this and I can continue to move forward. But I watch this tendency in myself and in so many people to be really quiet and like play it cool. And it's like, whoa, that is such a bizarre way to engage with someone that you're exchanging so much energy with. Now I just don't even, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. And it's really brave to describe these liminal spaces because I've experienced the other person being a little shocked at first, like, wait, why are you? And I'm like, well, I'm introducing a new dialogue. I don't really have the wording yet, but will you bear with me here? We can set a timer if you don't have much patience for this.
No, I definitely, this past year especially, have been working towards creating my own definitions for who I want to be in this world and how I want to engage with my partners and allowing them the space to be vulnerable and kind of sit with it and work through their own definitions of how they want the dynamic to work between us. One of the things you said in our last call might be one of the best things I've ever heard about relationships. And you said, don't let a relationship rob you of your honesty. Yeah, I like immediately wrote that down and I was like, oh, that is so true, because even our relationship with ourselves, like we lie to ourselves on a daily basis. And then when we allow the relationship to take away our honesty of our full sense of being and we're kind of withholding, and that's different from like decidedly being like, I don't want to express this right now, or whatever it is for you that you're not revealing those things, but knowing what is at the core of the not revealing, but to kind of sit and be and act and behave in a world of assumption, assuming the other person is thinking this way, assuming if you do this they're gonna do that, and like not coming to them and saying like, hey, instead of assuming these things and then allowing my behavior to work through fantasy at this point, like what my brain is thinking is going to happen, and playing a game with myself, but calling it a relationship. Why don't we talk so that we're exactly to your point of like, we don't have to be on the same playing field. We could be playing different games, but as long as I know where you're at and you know where I'm at, that is healthy connection. It's not the floating in assumptions, because then it just gets worse and worse and we just keep assuming more and more, and like completely having a relationship that's not even with this other human. There's no connection, there's no, and like I think it's funny, and I love that you said like having regular check-ins with everybody, regardless of the label, but like just checking with people, because on a daily basis we change. Checking in with yourself, checking in with your partners, checking in with your parents, and seeing like, where are you at? And then like orienting yourself in that and going like, okay, this works for me. And sometimes like it might not, like, hey, you're distancing yourself, you need time, and maybe that's a good cue for us to take some space, versus like, I feel it but I don't want to say it, I'm really scared to bring it up, but I can sense that they're like pulling away or something's happening, and it must be me, or it must be that thing I said at dinner the other night that was like a stupid joke that wasn't really funny, like whatever panic thinking assumptions that are happening. It's like we're so scared of communicating, or like the reaction to that communication, but instead it's like, I would actually rather just know I'm playing pickleball, you're playing tennis, and you know what I mean? Like, I would rather know that than try and force this idea that you're playing with me on this court right now and here.
Well, and that's the interesting thing is that when someone honestly gives you the information, you can act accordingly. And it just alleviates all this nonsense of one person being like, oh, well, they want, they're coming on too strong and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, did you let them know where you are? Like, did you communicate how you feel? And then the other person doesn't have to guess. And then the other person can regulate accordingly, or, can choose to leave. But there are these sneaky things that we do of like, We want that other person's, we don't even realize it, but we want that other person's, we want to feel wanted by the other person, but we don't really want to be with the other person. So then we're going to be mean to them to create the distance, but then we also are going to be pulling them. And it's just like, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're moving into a new era of healthy human connection, especially as we're all becoming more and more sensitive. And so it's really important to start to have new language around these things and really make effort to experience our own feelings and communicate. And like with the honesty piece, is it's incredible, like you were saying, the ways in which we will subtly, without even, it's unconsciously a lot of times, anticipate how what we really want to say is going to land on the other person, and then we will distort our like honest emotions or honest feelings, or we'll distort our energy field really, in order to feel safe and engaging with that, like quote unquote safe and engaging with that person, so that we don't hurt the person, we don't hurt ourselves, and we don't have to feel the ickiness of obligation. Obligation is a big thing. The icky, release the obligation. Everyone, just let it go. But not showing up in honesty, it distorts your energy field. I've watched over and over and worked with people where they've distorted their own energy field so much in these interactions that they can't even feel what they really want anymore. And that's why I'm saying don't let it rob you of your honesty, because that's your energy field. Like that's your ability to know what you want and what you desire. And if you can't express what you desire and you've perpetually distorted that over and over by choosing kind of the same type of, oftentimes it is a pattern thing, choosing the same type of partner, it's like that's a spell you've got to break out of. And I love identifying those spells we've cast on our energy fields and snapping people out of it. And is like, this is your opportunity. Like, it may not feel great, but this is your opportunity to show up and clear that spell so that you can have a direct connection with your desire.
Mm-hmm. I've witnessed that. I've experienced that myself. Like, that's part of what codependent relationships
Yes.
are, is like
I was going to bring up that word
putting like,
codependency. Yeah.
yes, exactly. It's putting casting a spell on yourself at a young age, and like and then just carrying it around, and like the layers keep coming on. I mean, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Harry Potter, but like that invisibility cloak, but like imagine just keep layering that on and on and on, and what used to be transparent and you can see and make decisions in the world and see the world, it distorts our reality as well. Like it distorts the internal, so it blocks us from being able to go in and make decisions and have clear thoughts. It's when one of the indicators of this is like if I have a friend saying like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, you just explained to me what's going on with your partner. You know what to do. You're literally saying it without saying the words. And that is like a big indicator of, oh, I have the veil. This veil is so heavy. I can't even see out and I can't see in. And I love that you said it's a spell that's cast. We are the ones casting that spell on ourselves. There's no witch. There's no evil empress that's like her. It's it's us. And then every relationship, every time it's like, oop, I gotta keep hiding this because it's it's still happening and I don't want to admit it, so I'm just gonna keep putting this veil on.
Yes, and be weary of the blame game, because that can often
Mm-hmm.
indicate that like you can free yourself. Because a lot of people, I see them stuck in a dynamic they don't like with a partner, and I'm like, "Have you expressed it?" And they're like, "No, she keeps doing this." And I'm like, "Who cares?" Over time, you have the distorted energy field, and that is attracted, it's actually like physics. It's attracted this partner with a certain patterning. And in this moment, you have the opportunity to break this. And it may end the relationship, but it might not. And regardless, you are retrieving your soul. No, I'm kidding. But you are retrieving your sense of integrity and your ability to be a true creator, because you have access to a clear understanding of your energy field.
I think we need more fairy tales that address codependent behavior like and freeing yourself, and like the hero, the white knight, is actually you. It's you. It's not, I mean, I think what was that one, Frozen. What I loved about that one is like it's one of the first Disney films where like they had the knight in shining armor, but he actually wasn't the knight, and these two sisters saved each other in it. And like so they have boyfriends, they have partners, but it's not it's not about them saving them. And then you kind of witness that, and there's kind of like these gimmicky things of like the hero trying to do it. And he's like, he's not going to do it because she's already doing it. Like she's already leaps and bounds ahead of him achieving these things. So it's kind of like we need more fairy tales that address these approach these dynamics of like your partner isn't the one to save you. And I told you about the book The Conscious Loving by Gay Hendricks on our call. That book is about codependency, and one of the things within that he speaks to is the fact that like with couples oftentimes there's a moment where then it stops becoming about communicating or even the argument at hand. It's like, who can wear the victim crown first?
Woo!
Who is the victim in this?
Yeah.
And like the goal and the end game is like, I am the victim. You are doing this to me. I don't deserve this anymore. Like that energy starts to build and become the dynamic. And it's not even about any of the little stupid things. Who loaded the dishwasher this way? You forgot to get this at the grocery store. Whatever these little arguments are in these type of coupling, it's the you did this to me, or I deserve this, and the entitlement, and then the entitlement of being the victim and playing that role out and playing that part out it's a big issue in majority of relationships. And like being I was just going to say like and being comfortable enough to like say like, hey, no, I am not the victim. I don't want to play the victim, and kind of taking accountability for your role in that is what breaks that.
And, taking the 50%, right? It does take two to tango. But I was about to say, we think of these things as like small and maybe we'll just let them slide. But this microcosm work is playing out in the macrocosm. And it's like, it is really profound work. Like, I just wanted to circle back to when I was talking about describing the liminal spaces and sort of describing like the feelings and the content of instead of the labeling of the framework. I mean, all around us, like societal frameworks are collapsing and we're really, I think I sense that we're coming into our hearts in a new way. And so these small human interactions, even if it's just that one night stand or whatever, they really are a profound opportunity to do the larger work on a small scale. And that's why I feel so, I feel passionate about it for many reasons, but that is one reason why I feel passionate about it is because I can see how directly correlated it is. Like, and we need to make these changes on a one-to-one level as we are walking and making these like larger political changes.
Mm-hmm. The systemic changes, we need to do them.
Yes. Yeah.
Like we have to break the systems within us that are like overpowering
Exactly.
us.
Like the social
Mm-hmm.
programming within us. Otherwise, we're going to create the same shit that we've been doing. And it's having better one-to-one human connection and really dropping into that, the weaving of spirit and humanness is starts to dispel a lot of that social programming. And so a lot will unravel on its own and we'll have a clear understanding of how to build externally better.
Thank you so much. I can talk to you for hours.
It was so fun.
I'm really grateful for our friend SJ who kind of connected us and saw that this would be a really great dynamic and connection and conversation.
Yes.
Just to close out, where can people find you?
Okay. So I am intermittently active on Instagram in
Mm-hmm.
in Kyle Freeman, the letter N, Kyle Freeman. And then recently I started a Patreon that right now is more of I've been doing seasonal breath and energy work for the past few years online. And so I'm continuing that on the Patreon. And then I also am weaving in like my perspective and understandings of space and energetic intimacy and all of that. And I don't know, is there a link that we could put in the notes? I don't actually
Absolutely,
know
yes.
I don't know
Yeah.
the link
Yeah.
off the top of my head.
Yeah. No, I can add it in. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are the two main spaces that I show up. And, I do a lot of work one-on-one. So I have a website that we can also put in there. And I occasionally pop into Skyting in New York and the studio in New York.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Thank you, Kyle, again. Enjoy the rest of your time in New York.
Thank
And
you.
hopefully I can speak to you soon. We'll connect in person and meet in real life.
Yes.
Until then, Enjoy the rest of your summer.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
After we had recorded our podcast, Kyle reached out to say that she wanted to share one last thing with our listeners. Part meditation, part visualization, this next segment is a suggestion from Kyle for you to practice in your home when you're in transition of moving, or even to reclaim a space or reset the energy and align yourself with your environments.
As you are transitioning from one home to the next, one really helpful thing to do is to call your energy back from the previous home so that you can carry all of yourself forward to your new home. So, what I suggest is that when you are done moving all of your objects out of the home, the apartment, the house, so it's empty and you're ready to return the keys, return to the home and sit somewhere. I'm going to suggest a central location at the home. So, a location in the home that you feel like you can connect to every space in the home, like you can expand your energy to connect to the fullness of the home. And slow down your thoughts, slow down your breathing so you come into more of a space of being, and that will allow you to connect to the energy of the home. And thank it, as in come into the heart and connect to a sense of appreciation for what that home gave you and any other people living there with you. And you can be really honest with this conversation, if you will. So if it was overall a bad experience, you can acknowledge that. But the idea is that you're coming into your heart and holding all of this, or having this dialogue from the space of the heart. Of like, okay, this wasn't great, but it has helped me have a certain insight that has led me to my next space. Or whatever feels honest to you. And maybe it was an incredible experience with the home and you have a little bit of grief around leaving it, and you can express that and you can share that. So after that feels complete, I want you to call all of your energy back into your body so that you are uprooting or drawing any connection that you have to this home back into yourself. So no energy is leaking out into this home, and you're able to carry that forward with you into your new home. And I have different visualizations that I prescribe for this part of the process, but you can also use your imagination and create your own. So the point is, the karmic contract you have with this home is complete. So gratitude, and you want to call your energy back so it's not lingering in connection with the home anymore. And actually, this is also really helpful for the future inhabitants. And if it was a sudden move and for some reason you felt like there was more to learn from this contract with the home, you can ask your higher self, the divine, the universe, to gently reveal these lessons through another avenue. And that helps you further pull out any connection with this particular home. All right. Bye-bye now.
Special thanks to all of our guests. Head South is hosted by Kat Meyer, produced by Isis Barlow, edited by Megan Hook, with music by Lily Rezi Rothman, graphics by Ella Chodos Irvine, cover art by Gina Ship Casey, and intro by Murph Meyer.